Now, when you did the shopping over the weekend, though, did you specifically look for Spring Gully items? Since, I think, Thursday when the announcement was made, or the middle of last week, there has been a huge focus on what is obviously a very much loved South Australian company that is experiencing some very tough times. They announced they went into voluntary administration. They called in the administrators in the middle of last week. But since then, there has been an outpouring of support, not just from individuals and consumers, but from businesses and supporters in that way, large corporations in some cases as well. What impact can that have? And why did you do it? If you did go out and specifically look for Spring Gully products, if you are specifically supporting them over the last few days since you've heard of this, I'd love to hear why, and we'll see what impact that might be able to have. Give us a ring on 1300 222 891. Love to hear why and what motivated you. You can also text us on 0467 922 891. But we thought we'd look at seeing how this overwhelming support over the last few days might impact on them from a man who knows all about trying to get people interested in product, because that's his business. Sputnik is an advertising creative and joins us now. Hi, Sputnik.
Hello, Sonia. How are you?
I'm very, very well. And I can imagine, and rightly so, that the Spring Gully owners and staff would be thrilled by the support they've seen over the last few days. But it seems to me that it's hard to gauge how that happens. Why do you think it has in this particular instance?
Yeah, look, it definitely falls into the category of what we call a phenomenon, doesn't it? Because, I mean, we've seen SA businesses drop like flies over the last 12 months, whether it's, Darryl Lee or, a couple of the solar energy companies or whatever. And for some reason, pickled onions have captured people's imaginations. And I've got a few ideas why it might be. I don't know if anyone can quite, formularise it, for instance. But I think one of the things that definitely helped was that it became very personal, because very early on we saw a photo of the family, and not just, the boss or anything like that, but we saw a young lady, a young man, an older guy, and, I don't know exactly who everybody is, but I'm guessing they're all parts of the family that own this business, and it got personal very quickly, and people like to help people, certainly more than they like to help companies, which is impersonal.
I'm interested, though, because I'm only thinking of a building company that went under in the last couple of months. It was a family-run thing, and we saw the family very early on too, and yet we didn't see the same response.
Yep.
Even though there was sympathy, we didn't see the same response.
Yeah, one of the other factors that I've actually, before I even knew that I was going to be chatting to you, I did actually spend a bit of time thinking about this. And of course, one of the other things that I've sort of identified as a potential factor is, these guys have come out, and it's probably only a fraction before it's too late, but they've certainly come out and said it's not quite over yet. And of course, there's a big difference between pickles and houses. So if you come out and say, hey, we really want your support, could you just go and buy a house or build a house? That's a very different degree of difficulty than can you go and buy, jar of pickles for $2 from the local supermarket.
And would you compare that then to, in the same week we've seen, problems at Holden, not that they're going under, but certainly we've seen jobs lost because people aren't buying enough Holdens. It's a much bigger decision to go out and buy a Holden than it is to buy a jar of pickled onions.
Yeah, and while we care about the employees who are losing their jobs out there, do we really care about General Motors who, as a sort of a global organisation, we have this sense that, there was a famous story, in the US downturn where all the people turned up to, I don't know, the White House or wherever they went in their private jets looking for handouts, from the government. So I think there is a sense that those big companies get what they deserve to a certain extent, even though there are innocent people who suffer as a result of them not quite getting it right, like when people get put off, on the factory, which is obviously a terrible thing.
Well, speaking of Sputnik, he's an advertising creative. We're trying to sort of get to the bottom of whether and why there has been such a huge outpouring of support for Spring Gully. I think many of us have expressed how much we love the company and perhaps the product as well, but other South Australian companies have gone very close to under over the last couple of years, and this seems to be a phenomena. What is it? We'll come back and talk more with Sputnik in just a moment, but Jill Whittaker's given us a ring. Jill's the Deputy Mayor at Campbelltown. Hello, Jill.
Oh, hi, Sonia. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. What did you want to add to this?
Look, I wanted to just say that I think part of it is karma, that this is a family business which has given extensively to many, many different organisations and community groups to assist them in the past without any expectation of anything in return. And I think that people are very grateful for what has been given to them by Spring Gully, and see that Spring Gully has given tremendously to the community over the years, and it's only fair that the community now rallies behind them.
What do you think it's something that is simply an affordable way that people can support? I mean, it's not that hard to go out and buy a jar of honey or a bottle of pickled onions. Is it an affordable way that people can put their hand up and say, we'll support you?
I think it's a very affordable way, and it's also something that we can do regularly because we all go shopping, and it's a way that we can say we think this is well worthwhile to have a company like this that supports the local community, that is South Australian, and which has given so much. I mean, from the point of view of the Australian Local Government Women's Association, we've had support through that organisation. I know that they've been tremendous supporters of groups like Rotary, who've raised funds for many, many different charities. So it is something that's easy to do. You know, we're shopping anyway. We can easily get some pickles this week, and honey. You know, they've got some great products, chilli chutney, all sorts.
All right, Jill, thanks very much for adding your views to this. Jill Whittaker, Deputy Mayor at Campbelltown. Quickly, David at Quorn, you've got another point to add. What did you want to say, David?
Yeah, bottom line is money. If you've got something on a shelf that's $2 home brand, then you've got their Spring Gully at $3, and I've bought them all my life because I like them and I like the taste, plus they're Australian. But if you haven't got no money, you're going to spend $2. And with the Holden and the housing industry, people aren't, like I said, people aren't just going to go out and buy them. And they get what they deserve. The stand-up movement where people said the 80% are being done over by the 10% or so forth, that's coming true, and people are starting to wake up. About time. Bottom line, money.
Thanks, David. Sputnik, let's continue our discussion. In relation to timing, and David mentioned money and time, have we just reached a critical time where we've seen a lot of South Australian companies going under, and it's suddenly people are waking up and saying, we can't let this continue?
Yeah, look, there's a balance there. I mean, Malcolm Gladwell wrote that book called The Tipping Point, where, you know, suddenly something eventually gets to the stage where it catches on. And I'd love to believe that people are sick and tired of seeing local businesses get, experience tough times because of a lack of support. I'm not sure that it's true, but it damn well should be. The last caller raised the point, though, and this is critical as well, is that everyone has principles until they cost money. You know, we all want to do the right thing. When we introduced recycling, we all said we'd do it until we found out that we had to wash out the dog food cans, and we went, oh, hang on a minute, that's kind of a bit gross. And it's the same with supporting local businesses. We've all got our threshold. This is classic, marketing 101. You know, if you're trying to get someone to do one thing instead of the other, all things being equal, if you've got a nicer ad or you've got a better story to tell or better packaging or whatever, all things being equal, people will do that, and they'll also do the right thing. So if it's an environmentally friendly or, farm-laid eggs or whatever it is. But the minute that cost differential gets too large, those principles can go out the window. And not because people don't care or, you called them before a much-loved company. There's lots of things that you can love, but love isn't, I say this in personal life, by the way, but love isn't a relationship. You can be in a relationship without love, and you can have love without a relationship. And that's what's happened with this company. Everyone suddenly has got all these fantastic, fond, loving stories of, how great they were, but where have they been over the past, longer than 3 weeks or 3 days, in fact?
That is my point that I'd like to bring up, because one of the texters here says we need to show large supermarkets we want our own companies, not overseas products. Well, this has been building, presumably, to get to this point. I mean, I know there are other costs and there's been much discussion made on the cost of doing business in South Australia, but there has to also be the fact that people who were buying the products perhaps weren't doing it or not as often as they used to. So where has been the support up until now? Why are suddenly we getting this rush?
Yeah.
And will it continue? Could it continue? Or is it just going to be this last hurrah?
Yeah, well, I think the jury's out on Spring Gully. I mean, as much as I'd love to believe that, this flurry of activity is going to solve everything, I mean, I think there are probably lots of factors involved in their situation, and I sort of won't go into that. I mean, I'm not sort of privy to all the information about things that are and aren't happening and where they do and don't have distribution, which was, clearly one of the issues they faced. But in a broader sense, I think the home brand thing is an issue, but we're all guilty of it at times. I think we've seen people buying things online, and when that dollar difference changes, it is very challenging because people are obviously price sensitive, always have been, always will be. It is difficult for companies to compete with sometimes bigger companies or international companies. So all of those things are there. And then one of the other things that I've heard a lot of in the last couple of days, which, I suppose applied to Spring Gully, and that is sometimes we just don't know who to support because it's very difficult when you go in there. You're sort of bombarded with a barrage of labels and choices. It's not always easy to know what the right thing to do is. And then, of course, the cynic in us goes, well, hang on a minute, but that's owned by that company who really own that company who own that company. And it is a very confusing decision-making process for a lot of people.
It's 22 minutes past 1 here on 891 ABC Afternoons. We're talking about, I guess, what we're dubbing the Spring Gully effect, how in the last few days it has engendered so much support, not only from consumers, but also from business, from supermarkets that stock their brands to others who want to support them in other ways. Why do you think this has happened, and why has it happened now? Let's go to the Barossa. Hello, Patrick.
Yeah, good afternoon, Sonia. I'm to bring up a couple of points. I'm a Spring Gully tragic, always have been, always will be. I love the taste of their stuff. It's always been quality, and that's what it's about for me. As another great thing Australian company too, the Bambu company always look for their products, but they're getting harder to find on the shelves as well. Now, people go in the supermarkets looking for stuff, they're in a bit of a rush. They'll just grab the first thing they see. If it's cheaper, all the better. But when you're really going to look for Spring Gully on the shelves, some people can't be bothered doing that.
So you reckon they're being squeezed out on the shelves, Patrick?
I reckon they're missing a lot of space on the shelves. And it's not always about price. People go for quality. Like, I'm 57 years of age. I've been eating Spring Gully all my life. Now, there's a lot of people in South Australia that would have had a taste of their products at one stage or another. But in the hectic world we live in, they've probably just forgotten about the taste and just gone for the first thing they can see. And Spring Gully, it's really hard to see on some shelves.
All right, Patrick. Well, thank you for that. Just looking at the texts that are coming through at the moment, just on that line, Nick says, Spring Gully went to 2 Coles and 2 Woolies stores over the weekend. All had Spring Gully products on the bottom shelf, marked down 25% as clearance at one of them. Brian of Henley Beach says maybe stop buying cheap all the time. Justin from Seaford says, I went to my local Foodland on Saturday and bought 2 Spring Gully products purely because as an ex-Mitsubishi worker, I know how much it hurts when you're made redundant, even though you make a great product. And Mike says big supermarkets have home brand products that they may place and price to beat other brands. They need separate outlets that do not compete with the items that they stock. Sputnik, is that part of it? I mean, we've seen some of the biggest supermarkets and some of the South Australian branded supermarkets suggest that they're going to do what they can to help out in this way with, I'm presuming, shelf space and promoting the product. How important is that placement on the shelves for a product?
Yeah, look, it's critical. And look, to be fair, I have to be a little bit careful about what I say about supermarket and supermarket tactics, because clearly some of the local Coles, and whether that's an individual manager or whatever, have been quite supportive of this. But it's ironic, isn't it, that we hear people ring up and saying, I went to Coles and Woolies, because I have no affiliation with any supermarkets, but clearly they're not South Australian-based supermarkets, and we're lucky enough to still have a very major supermarket chain here that is South Australian owned. So I would like to think that if people were serious about supporting this South Australian issue, they'd be looking in those sorts of supermarkets first. But look, the major supermarkets have had a very aggressive home brand strategy for quite a long time. There's obviously a lot more profit and margin in it for them, and that has squeezed out suppliers. And I think Coles were quite open about the fact that they had to drop one brand because they only had room for a certain amount of brands, and someone had to go, and it happened to be, in this case, I think the Leabrook brand that Spring Gully make. So, there's no question that shelf space, and they put an awful lot of pressure, and look, this is just business, I mean, that's life, isn't it? But they put an awful lot of pressure on suppliers to maintain those places on shelves.
And a lot of money, presumably, don't they?
Yeah, look, I wasn't going to go down that path, but look, there is all those issues, and part of it, by the way, and let's not forget this. I'm the marketing guy, so now this is where I have to say this. Let's not forget that quite often what supermarkets require of a brand is for the brand to support their products with marketing. And what this latest issue shows is that if you've got something relevant, interesting, compelling to say about your product, you can actually spur people into action. Now, I'm not for a second suggesting that this latest thing was a marketing tactic, but it sure as hell has ended up being one. And you know, I think Spring Gully, from my point of view, have been really invisible for a long time. I know that they've done a lot of marketing. They've only had a Facebook page for, 4 days or something like that. In fact, a fan page popped up before they created their own page. They've now got 12,000, likers on their page. And I think that to a certain extent we have to accept that, businesses also have a responsibility to support their own, brands and business in like. And perhaps there's been, some of that missing as well from that equation.
Well, the points you're making are not lost on some of our listeners. Sandra at the Barossa says, I've lived in South Australia for 6 years and had no idea that they were local. Where has their advertising been? And let's go to Hope Valley. Hello, Maggie.
I'm a bit tense about this because the gentleman in charge was prepared to speak to any body of people who asked him to, Probus Club, or I'm in a retirement village and he came and spoke here to an audience. We all knew that Spring Gully was South Australian. If we had taken the trouble to remember, if you were liking to purchase that sort of article.
Maggie, you wanted to make a point about advertising, I understand.
His form of advertising.
Yes.
Maybe they couldn't afford to advertise like bigger companies, but his advertising was coming to speak to bodies of people. If we didn't go out then and purchase his goods, we were slack.
Yeah, so a very direct and personal approach, you thought, in that way, Maggie. Thanks very much for your call. And let's go to Mario at Port Lincoln. Hello, Mario.
Hi, Sonia. This is something that I feel really passionate about. You hear a lot of people complain about the supermarkets and product placement and things like that. But the thing that gets me is how many people have actually complained about it? How many people have actually asked for the store manager or have rang head office about it in Sydney and said what's going on? I mean, I have a big issue. My big gripe is tomatoes. Why is it that all of their home brand now, when you look at it, is based, it all comes from the United Arab Emirates. It's in the middle of the bloody desert. And all of their, most of their home brand stuff in a particular chain is made in the UAE. Well, it's crazy.
Thanks for your call, Mario. Sputnik, just before we finish up, I'm interested by the number of people who refer to, I've always had their products. I love the taste, or it brings back memories of a certain thing. That historical memory and knowledge, even though you perhaps on a day-to-day basis aren't supporting it, is that one of the variables, one of the things that's come together to create what we, I guess, are terming the Spring Gully effect over the last few days?
Yeah, there's definitely some fondness for the brand.
But also the youth, I imagine, youth and memories and the way life is in South Australia.
Yeah, but this is a double-edged sword, Sonia. See, the people who have those memories, some people of my generation remember my dad buying them, but my dad is in about the same state of health as their company at the moment, not able to buy anything. And this sort of is a little bit of an indicator of how companies like them can find themselves in the position they are, because that historical significance or that story or those fond memories, the people who have those are somewhat of a dying breed, and I don't mean that quite so insensitively as it sounds, but, certainly the under, let's say, 35s maybe, I mean, if they haven't heard of it or don't have any of those memories, that wouldn't be surprising. And when you have a consumer base that are getting more mature and their buying decisions change with their circumstances or, whatever else happens, those other variables, then you can only trade off that for so long. So it's definitely helped here, but I would argue that in some ways it's also potentially fundamental to some of their problems in terms of the demand for their products.
One of the other things I wanted to raise is how much do trends play a part in this? We were only talking off air about how, a few years back, there was no sort of party or drinks night where you didn't have sun-dried tomatoes. Well, now you wouldn't use them that much. I imagine spring onions, pickled onions, fall into the same sort of category. I don't know, a lot of people go, gee, must grab myself a spring onion, a pickled onion at the moment, and under 35s, I don't know how many of them are eating pickled onions. So is it a trend thing? And if we got back to cabana and pickled onion and Jats and cheese days, maybe that would create a natural resurgence for a longer effect.
Look, every business has a responsibility to be aware of, and regardless of what they can do to manipulate this, but to be aware of supply and demand. And you know, one of the really interesting things I saw on the Spring Gully Facebook page earlier today was that a customer had gone to the effort of creating a blog of recipes that involved Spring Gully products. Now that's fantastic, but it's also embarrassing. Because why is a customer doing that for them, you know, when clearly that's one of the things they could have done to address exactly what you were talking about.
Or harnessed it in some way themselves.
And I think they're doing that now because they've obviously shared a link and they're promoting it and all that sort of stuff. But exactly what you were talking about is clearly one of many factors. And look, we should be careful not to oversimplify these things. Obviously, there's always lots of different factors, but you've certainly identified a few good ones. And you know, that's definitely one of them is the trend thing. I mean, I think some things like olives perhaps have been a bit more of a constant. You know, I don't really remember them sort of going in and out quite so much. I'm trying to think of things in some of their categories.
Yes.
I mean, let's not forget they make honey, and honey doesn't seem to have sort of necessarily gone in and out of fashion, but their brand
But,
seems
Sputnik, I don't know about anyone else. I found out that Spring Gully made honey last week when the voluntary administrators were coming in.
Correct. Yeah, and that's somewhat of a communication issue, isn't it? I mean, you know, and again, it's not me pushing my marketing barrow, it's just a statement of fact. If we ever doubted that marketing could make a difference, we've only got to look at what happened over the last 3 days. And I mean, look, fair play to the lady who's, by the way, before said, look, maybe they didn't have the marketing budget. You know, that's absolutely understandable. And fair play to the media. I mean, the media have inadvertently championed this cause and given them, I don't know what the dollar figure, I'm sure someone can work it out, but probably hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of marketing exposure that they certainly could have never done themselves. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't some things that you can do, and probably more than they were doing, but it's definitely a big part of it. And promoting trends or even attempting to create them or creating demand, that's definitely a part of it. It's not the easy part of marketing, but it is a part of it.
Sputnik, great to talk with you. Thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for having me, and good luck to Spring Gully and all the other brands out there.
South Australian ones, of course. Advertising creative, Sputnik. Well, we say that. I mean, and it is great to support South Australian brands, but there are a lot of South Australians who work in companies run by others as well.